What's up, everyone? I hope everyone's doing good today. So, what we're going to be doing today is learning. So, I realize a lot of people they have a character they love. They have favorite characters, and they don't know anything about them. Or they just don't know them like they think they do. And that's because they haven't really read the source material, which is big. If you love a comic book character, you have to at least reference some source material. You can't look at the adaptations and think that that's like the source. It's not, because even the guys who make adaptations, whether it be a show or a movie, sometimes they don't really know what they're talking about. So today is going to start the You Don't Know series. And the character we're going to do is the one that actually got me into comics. And if you haven't already guessed which character that is, it's Spider-Man. I'm not going to go over every single cool storyline, and believe me, he's got tons of cool storylines. But I want to go over some key facts, key issues, and some key storylines, in my opinion, that I believe will really give you a real good grasp on what the character is. And if you ever see an adaptation that, might be a little less than faithful or take some liberties, you'll know, okay, I see what's going on here. Not saying that everything actually has to be exactly the same as a comic, but there are some key themes that run for a comic book character or whatever character that you just can't get rid of. How they get to that said point, maybe that can change, but you can't take it away. And unfortunately, Spider-Man, in a lot of his adaptations, has suffered from that. Sony. Oh, don't worry. I'm looking at you too, MCU. Let's start with some pretty basic points here. So, Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, was born in Queens, New York, Forest Hills to be exact. He was raised by, Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And we all know that he got bit by that radioactive spider, and it gave him some pretty cool abilities. Those abilities being his spider sense, which is, sensing danger before it gets there, that precognitive sense. Also, the proportionate strength, agility, speed, reflexes of a spider. And he also made his own web shooters, which points to something else, which is not like, a power he got from the spider, but he's also a genius, which is something that a lot of people don't touch on, because he did a lot of this stuff that we're talking about as a teenager. He built that as a teenager. I mean, I know I can't build any web shooters. Now that we got those basic facts out the way in terms of his powers and where he was born, let's talk about reading. What do we read first? What about the debut? The first thing, Amazing Fantasy number 15. That's where he first came out from. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. That was also, those two were the ones that wrote that as well. Now, what's really cool about this is it gives you that storyline that you see in almost every single adaptation of him, which is he gets his powers from the spider that we just talked about. You get the great power comes great responsibility speech from Uncle Ben. He uses his powers to try to get money. He fights Crusher Hogan when he's in the hallway and that burglar runs past him and security stop him. He does not stop him, and that leads to the death of his uncle, because that same burglar that he let go is the one that goes to kill his uncle. Why is Amazing Fantasy so important? Why is this issue so important? Because it sets the precedent for something that keeps happening to him later, which is his ability to just keep on losing loved ones, not being able to keep people safe, no matter what kind of cool abilities. Also, he's a teenager when this is happening. It's actually what drew me to him, is the fact that since he's a teenager, he still goes through teenage stuff. He goes through feelings of inadequacy. He wasn't that strong physically. He was the nerd. He was bullied. And he still goes through that. He has to hide his abilities. So he still goes through that stuff, even though he could do some pretty crazy stuff to people while saving the city. So he's not just a superhero. He's also just a regular human. He's a kid. And also, there weren't too many teenagers. I think really he set the precedent to having a teenager have their own series, because most teenagers in comics were really just a sidekick at that time. The next read is a little bit of a fast forward. He's in college at this point. It's called If This Be My Destiny. I hope I'm getting that right. Now, what's really cool about this story is that this is the first time, is when he enrolls into Empire State University. He meets Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn for the first time, which is pretty cool. His Aunt May is struggling with a sickness, and the person who stole pretty much the cure to it is somebody in the master planner, who's actually Dr. Octopus. And Dr. Octopus traps him under this place with water, which is something that, there's actually a famous meme they use for it. People usually write whatever they want with this picture. It's actually from this comic. So he gets himself out of that with pure will, while having to deal with college stuff, romance, and having to save his aunt, and have to fight Dr. Octopus, what's really cool about this is, once again, showing that very, very human aspect. He has to not just because he's a superhero, his regular life doesn't stop. And getting attacked on all levels. Like, he starts like a relationship with this girl, Betty Brant. He's kind of a douche, honestly, to her. And then he's got everything going on with his aunt, and then he's fighting like villains getting coordinated by the master planner. It's nuts. The next two we're going to talk about are very closely related because they have to do pretty much with a particular family. And the first one would be the death of Captain Stacy, or George Stacy, right? That was Gwen Stacy's father. He was a very well-respected police captain for the NYPD. He's also like an avid supporter for Spider-Man. Even when Spider-Man got like brainwashed into stealing some stuff, he was still like an advocate trying to like prove his innocence. He was also like a surrogate father for Peter, and that was a very big deal. While Peter is fighting Dr. Octopus on a roof, the rubble from their fight actually falls on Captain Stacy when Captain Stacy pushes a kid out the way and he gets killed by that. Pretty heartbreaking because he goes down there, pulls him from the rubble. It's too late, and he tells him, "Hey, just keep my daughter safe, keep Gwen safe." And what's really crazy about that, or some of you know, which, you know, the follow up to that is Gwen dying, which happens during a fight with Green Goblin. Green Goblin actually kidnaps her, and it's revealed that when he threw her and Spider-Man went to go catch her, the actual, like, the recoil of him grabbing her is what killed Gwen. So what's really crazy about this is just that reoccurring theme is loved ones are just not safe with him. Like, you just can't get close to him, and he feels that way. As a matter of fact, when Captain Stacy died, Gwen actually moved away because she couldn't handle it, and also Spider-Man, well, Peter, you know, he felt that guilt, and he let her go, and then she came back to be with him anyway, and look what winds up happening to her. Sad. So next up, the original Clone Saga. Now, I say original because there's really, like, there's two different Clone Sagas, and then, like, a little clone story in between, but we're going to focus on the one that I believe had the most effect on Peter and was well received, which was the original Clone Saga. So the Jackal, or Miles Warren, was a professor in Empire State University, so he was Gwen and Peter's professor back in college. He specialized in cloning, and he did not get over the death of Gwen very well, also because he kind of had a thing for her. A little creepy. So he cloned her, and he also cloned Peter, and through cloning Peter, he found out that he was Spider-Man, and he, of course, blamed Spider-Man for Gwen's death. So he kind of arranged it so that the clones fight each other, try to kill each other, and then he actually tried to kill them both, like a bomb or something. And right after that, one of them dies, and it's assumed that Peter won, and he throws like the clone's body in the incinerator, and he's like, I know I'm not the clone because I love Mary Jane. It was very ambiguous, actually. Like, you didn't know if that really was Peter, even though they cleared it up later and they were like, no, it's not supposed to be ambiguous. That's really Peter. We're not trying to replace him. But whatever. The second Clone Saga is the one that came years later. That one introduced Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider. Ben as in Benjamin Parker, and Riley as in like Aunt May's maiden name. Also Kane, I hope I didn't say it, and Spider Side. So these were all introduced in this part, and also they gave like Peter like a DNA test, and he thought he was the clone because they faked the test just to like have Ben take the mantle of Spider-Man for a while, which a lot of people didn't like. A lot of people actually didn't dig that. They didn't like the fact that they had this guy instead of Peter, and Peter took like a break, and he even lost his powers for a bit. So I'm just mentioning that, but I think you should really just read the original Clone Saga, which is in Volume 1. It's like, it should be 149. Volume 1, Amazing Spider-Man 149. That should be where you should focus for the Clone Saga. Our fan favorite, the Alien Costume Saga. Now, if you're familiar with Secret Wars, that is where the alien costume first made its debut, or the black suit that everyone loves, right? Now, when Peter was out there in Battle World, when the Beyonder transported him and a whole bunch of other heroes out there, his red and blue suit got messed up in battle, and while trying to fix it, he actually ran into this black suit. Now, the black suit, responded to his commands mentally, It also had its own webbing. He could like hide stuff in it. It was pretty cool. It was amazing. Until he realized that it wasn't just a suit and it was actually a living symbiote, which literally took his body for a ride when he was sleeping sometimes. Yeah, not really cool. So, and it made him like aggressive at times, like almost killing people. Now, what's really cool, he went to Mr. Fantastic. He's like, look, I need help. Help me get this thing off me. He used like sonic waves to get it off of him. It got off of him, and then it went into his closet and acted like it was closed or something like that, and then hopped on his body again. Once he realized that, it's when you actually see that famous scene where he's in the church and he's using like the bells to get the suit off of his body, or the symbiote off his body. That happens, and the suit is heartbroken. It's mad that it's rejected by Spider-Man. It hates Spider-Man right now, and it bonds itself to the person who hates Spider-Man just as much as it does, which is Eddie Brock. Obviously, if you know the story, you know Eddie Brock turns into Venom, a very powerful, iconic villain, because not only is it strong, does he have the same abilities as Spider-Man, but he can't be sensed with the spider sense. Spider sense doesn't work on him because the suit was part of Peter's body, so it does not work. He can actually he's like the only one that could really sneak up on Spider-Man, which at that time at least, which was pretty damn scary. And as you know, Venom, the offspring of Venom, is Carnage, which was when his offspring, the part of the symbiote, went on Cletus Cassidy when they were locked up in Ravencroft, and that was a disaster because obviously Carnage is much stronger than Venom, and it leads to the next event. Maximum Carnage is crazy for a whole other reason. When Carnage is actually locked up in Ravencroft, he's there with Shriek, and they team up together. When they get out, Cassidy thought he didn't have any more of the symbiote in him, but when the symbiote was on him, it actually changed his blood so he could kind of like self-replicate the symbiote, which is absolutely nuts, right? Also, he teamed up with Shriek, Doppelganger, and a whole bunch of other villains, and they went on like this crazy homicidal rampage all through New York City, which meant Spider-Man, Venom, and other heroes had to team up just to fight them. What was interesting was to see like the dynamic between Spider-Man and Venom, where Venom was willing to kill, like we gotta take him out however we have to, and Spider-Man was kind of like, bro, I'm not doing that. Like that's not how I roll. To the point when he even left Venom to pretty much almost die. That's how angry he was in that. It was pretty crazy, and a lot of the heroes were kind of in shock at what was happening in front of them too. So Maximum Carnage was pretty cool because of that. It was also made into a video game, a pretty popular video game, which was good. You can probably still play it if you have an emulator or whatever like that. The next read I'd mention is SpiderMan Blue. Now that's actually a more emotional read because it's actually on Valentine's Day, and it focuses on how Peter Parker to that day is still affected by the death of Gwen Stacy. It's clearly the most traumatic experience in his life, and he's actually talking into a voice recorder about like how he feels, how he misses her, and pretty much how Mary Jane helped him find love again. And it's so important to understanding just how traumatic, and pretty much the whole story is about how he fell in love with Gwen. And obviously, I think this story got released almost like 40 years after like volume 1 issue whatever that Gwen and all that appeared, but they do a really good way of retelling the story without like losing the integrity of what happened so many years prior. So that's definitely something that you should read if you really want to see like a type of scarring that love and losing that really had on Peter. A personal favorite of mine is actually Kraven's Last Hunt. Now, Kraven the Hunter, what he does is, in this particular event, he hunts down Spider-Man as he does, and seemingly kills him, like pretty much right in the beginning. Like, shoots him, kills him. That's what you think. And then he puts on the Spider-Man suit, and he does what he considers to be a better job than Spider-Man, which is, brutalizing everyone pretty much, and even capturing the villain Vermin single-handedly, which is something that Spider-Man could not do. Eventually, Spider-Man digs himself out the grave that Craven put him in, because he's actually tranquilized, he wasn't actually dead, comes out and tracks Craven down, which is really what Craven wanted. And while he has Vermin there, like he lets him go, Craven is pretty much like, look, I'm done. Like, I did everything I needed to do. Like, I already showed that I can be a better hunter than you, and I'm good to go. And then he goes back to his house, and he thinks, like, everything is all good. He's peaceful. Craven, I'm talking about. And then he kills himself, which is absolutely nuts. But what this story does is it shows what the villain's perception of Peter is. Like, he thinks that he's inept, and for Craven's like a very animalistic villain. He thinks that because he's not really like embodying a spider, he's not really like showing the wrath of that, then that means you're inept. If you're not being brutal, if you're not being like the executioner, then what's the point of being you at all? The next thing we're gonna briefly talk about will be Civil War, only because even though Civil War is not like a Spider-Man event, like a Spider-Man only event, however, it is something that Spider-Man was heavily involved in. When it comes to Civil War, if you're not sure of the background, if you don't know the background, so pretty much the New Warriors had like a reality TV show. During that reality TV show, they wound up going against a house of villains. One in particular was named Nitro, who has the ability to literally just blow himself up and pull himself back together. And he killed a couple New Warriors and a whole bunch of children, I believe due to like a steroid he was on as well. Now, what that did was cause the government to enact the Superhero Registration Act, which meant that you had to give up your secret identity and be labeled as a weapon of mass destruction. So, big deal, because Spider-Man gave up his identity in front of the whole world. And then Kingpin, knowing that, went to go get his Aunt May killed, which leads into the One More Day storyline, which some people actually a lot of people didn't really like, because Aunt May was dying, and in order to save her, Peter had to make a deal with Mephisto, meaning he's like, hey, if you want her to live, you're gonna have to give up something. Give up your marriage to Mary J. Gave it up. And also all the people who found out about his secret identity had like a mental block put on them. Now, the illustration was actually pretty phenomenal in this, but a lot of people just didn't like the fact that they did away with something as crucial as the marriage to Mary J. And I get it. We have Superior Spider-Man, which I really dig. It actually starts off at Dying Wish. This is where it's like a Dying Wish event. That was where Otto was dying, and it's where the whole switcheroo even takes place, where he takes his consciousness and puts it into Peter's body, and Peter's consciousness goes into his dying body. This actually happens in Amazing Spider-Man 700 of that volume, because they pretty much replace Amazing Spider-Man with Superior Spider-Man. And once Otto Octavius is inside of this guy's body, he's like, you know what, I'm literally going to become a better Spider-Man. And he does a pretty good job. I mean, he's brutal though, and he actually has like his whole like spiderlings, which are like henchmen underneath him to help him fight crime around the world. The thing is, Spider-Man is actually still inside of his conscious, trying to like manipulate little things that he does. And even Otto Octavius starts to kind of fall in love with Mary J the same way that Peter does. So he tries to stay away from her, and he gets with somebody else named Anna actually later on. But where Superior Spider-Man actually leads to is something called Goblin Nation, where Norman Osborn comes back and has like this whole goblin themed crew or syndicate, actually, a goblin themed syndicate, and pretty much attack all the assets that Otto Octavius has, all of them. And Otto Octavius pretty much goes like, no matter what technology, all this money that I have, I am not going to be able to beat him. So he lets Peter take over the consciousness, and Peter is back in control of the body. And that was actually a pretty interesting storyline, because You see like the whole like Parker Industries get started. Like Otto Octavius starts that while he's in his body, and you see once again that perception of what Peter is. Like Peter's not using his full potential, or Peter could be this, and it's always the villain thinking they could do what Peter does, but they don't actually get who Peter actually is. They don't get that human aspect. They don't get what makes Spider-Man an actual hero until, the last minute, and, Otto Octavius gave his life for that, pretty much. So the last story that we're going to get into is Spider-Verse. Now that actually starts a little bit early. Before we get into actual Spider-Verse, where are the seeds planted? There's going to be a story called The Other, which you should read, which is the introduction to Ezekiel. That's actually like a older guy who Peter meets, who has very similar powers to him, and that guy tells him, like, you're actually a totem. That's the bridge between human and beast, specifically a spider totem. So what this does is it expands the mythos away from just, hey, we're just a radioactive spider, but you're part of this whole web of like supernatural beings. So it was always destined for you to have these powers. It's just how you got them, that's one thing, but you were always destined to have these powers. And it also introduces Cindy Moon, who is another totem, right? And actually very, very important. She actually winds up being one of the three important beings, the Scion, the Bride, and the Other. And there'll probably be a whole video, I'll get into that. But the thing that Ezekiel also tells Peter is about Morlun. Morlun is a being who is, the entire race that Morlun comes from feeds on totems. And pretty much told him that he's gonna come for you. So, and he does, and Morlun pretty much beats the crap out of Peter every single time that he sees him. He even rips his eye out at some point. And the Other, which is like a great totem that actually kind of possesses Peter, when he was at near death, actually makes him turn into like a man spider, and he kills Morlun. However, Morlun is obviously that's not the last we see of Morlun, and he comes back with his family, which are called the Inheritors, who once again all feed on beings, the totems to be exact. Now they go after pretty much the head of the spider totems, so to say, called the Great Weaver. Once they do that, they use the powers of the Great Weaver to enter into a whole bunch of different universes that have different Spider-Men or spider beings in them, hence Spider-Verse. So they're going into these different universes and devouring and feeding off of different universes, Spider-Men or Spider-Women or whatever, right? Now what's really cool about this is it really expands the mythos. Like it even makes Anansi the Spider a thing in the Spider-Verse, like saying that was the first spider, right? It's pretty cool. Well, first Spider-Man, right? Which is pretty cool, right? And besides that, you got tons of cool characters that became a regular there because they needed a spider army to actually fight the group of Inheritors, because the Inheritors are actually really, really strong. So you saw things like Cosmic Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Man 2099, and tons of other Spider-Man as well. Also, it obviously was the influence to a movie that people like, Into the Spider-Verse. Obviously, Into the Spider-Verse was a very small, dumbed down version to this because you've only got about 2 hours. You don't have forever to tell that story. And it was enjoyable as well. However, this is definitely a much more encompassing story, which I think you should read, especially if you like to see different versions of Spider-Man all at one time. And even see time displaced ones, because Superior Spider-Man actually ties into this as well. So yeah, Spider-Verse would be the last one. So the main point of all this was really just for education, right? A lot of people have tons of great characters they love, and I really want you to know where these characters come from. And specifically today, obviously, was about Spider-Man. So I hope you have a better grasp on what his character actually is. Now, this is obviously not all of the stories that have to do with him. There's tons of stories that we can pick from, and I can probably do a whole other video on other stories that you can watch. But these were just ones personally that I felt could be highlighted and were probably pretty easy for you to access as well. Also, that way when you're having that nice conversation with your friend, you guys are going back and forth, maybe now you'll be armed with some more information to win that argument if you want to, okay? And I'm gonna need you, if you are doing this already, to never call Spidey Sense a Spidey Tingle. Yeah. Into the nerd.